Hello, and welcome to Slice of Wine, the podcast that gives you the snippets of the people, places, and innovations behind the barrel. I'm your host, Aimee Cronin, and today I am with Bartholomew Broadbent, aka Baloo. Baloo is the president of Broadbent Selections, a renowned importer of unique wines from around the world. And I am so happy to have you on our show today.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Yes, you too. Now, Baloo, you are a lot of things. And one of them is, you're quite the pioneer for introducing new types of wines and new regions to the United States. I mean, your portfolio has, sort of the traditional French and, Italian, Argentinian wines, but you also have wines, South Africa, Portugal, England, Virginia, Lebanon. What sort of Broadbent Selections philosophy behind choosing wine partners, and how do you go about picking these wineries from around the world?
It's funny, during COVID, we launched wines from Italy and France, and we hadn't previously been doing that. And if anyone had been told me it was how easy it was to sell Italian wines, I would have done it years ago. But no, so I do enjoy the pioneering of wine regions. And there are five absolutes. When we pick a winery to represent, there are five absolutes that they must have. It must be the top quality from the region or considered with as a peer to the top quality wines. It must be family owned, very important. We don't work with people who say I represent 10 wineries and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And it must be good price per quality. Even if it's a $500 wine, it should be good value compared to other $500 wines. Or if it's a $10 wine, good value. So that's three. Four, it must be a family that is ethical and fun to work with and nice people, because life's too short to deal with people you don't like. And the fifth one is that each wine has to have a story. So those are the five things which we choose. And we represent about 40 wineries from around the world. And then we also have our own brand, the Broadbent, which you see behind me, which is, we make wines under the Broadbent label in Portugal, which includes Vinhou Verde, Dow, Douro, Port, Madeira, and table wines from Madeira. And we also make wines in Austria. And we also have a brand called the Curator, which is from South Africa. And most recently, from Napa Valley, we've started making wine in Napa Valley. And Auctioneer is what we've came out with. This is the second vintage. 2018 was the first vintage. And Auctioneer is a tribute to my late father, who was a wine pioneer auctioneer. He started the wine auctions for Christie's in 1966 and Hubline wine auctions in the 60s in America, and started the Napa Valley wine auction with Bob Mondavi 40 years ago, I guess. And he was also an artist, so he drew this little symbol.
That's one of your dad's pieces?
Yeah.
That is very cool. So, I mean, let's talk about your dad for a second, because your dad was your late father, which is sad that he passed, but he lived a really long and amazing life.
92.
Oh my gosh.
And he got married when he was 5 days before he turned 92. He got married for the second time.
I'd sign those papers, man. Like I want that. Like I want to be 92 with my new wife. He was, he's a beloved wine writer, famed auctioneer, master of wine. And this was your dad. Like this is, you're growing up with this in your life. Did you always know you were going to be in the wine industry, or did you like want to be a fireman?
I didn't know what I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So his name is Michael Broadbent. I don't think we mentioned that. And he he wrote for Decanter magazine for 433 consecutive months. And he also either wrote completely or contributed to over 50 wine books. So he was very prolific. And his art, which is also published as posters by a publisher in the UK and sold all over the world. If you want to see his art, it's on my Facebook. In my photos, there's a Bartholomew Broadbent Facebook, and there's a folder with all his art, which is about 700 pieces on that. I'm still trying to find more, but yeah. So he was very, and so I didn't. He didn't encourage me, but he didn't discourage me. So I think I should have been Hugh Grant or something like that, but I didn't think that. But so it was only when I left school and did my gap year, went to work in France for Hennessy Cognac, and then Harrods Wine Department in London, then went to Australia. And it was when I was in Australia, I wrote to him and said, I want to go into the wine business, and he was very excited. And really, that's when my relationship with him really sort of started developing.
And it's funny, your dad was an artist. My dad was actually an artist as well, but in his side time. And it's and he passed away a few years ago as well. But it's those wonderful discoveries that like the pictures in the drawer. You're like, oh my gosh, exactly. And all of these things. Are you doing anything? Is there anything you're doing with his artwork in addition, aside from the Facebook page?
I mean, there's a major art publisher who's publishing his works and this publisher sells to massive retailers, and but so some of his art is already as posters, but I would like to do a coffee table book of his art sometime, but that's got to find the time. Time is the problem.
So you're in Australia, you decide, Dad, yes, I do want to be in the wine industry. And sort of what was your first step into the wine industry in the United States? What happened?
That wasn't in the United States. So he wrote back, I was in Australia, and he said, well, you should come back now because there's an opening at Harvey's Wine Shop in Pall Mall in London. So I cut my 6-month stay in Australia short by a month and went to work for this wine shop in London. And really, I was there for a year or two, a couple of years, and one of my clients came out after a rather boozy club lunch, and we had the directors of Allied Breweries in a board meeting downstairs. So I gave them this guy a glass of sherry and shoved it in a closet and locked the door. And every 20 minutes, I opened the door and filled up his glass. And after 5 glasses, he said, "They'd like you in Canada." And it turned out he was consulting to a Canadian wine company and got me a job in Montreal for 2 years. But after a year there, they transferred me to Toronto, and I was in Canada for about 5 years and met the Symington family, who then offered me a job in the States to start their company in the US. And so I moved to San Francisco, spent 21 years there. But after 10 years of working for them, that's when I started my own company, Broadbent Selections, in 1996, so about 26 years ago.
So the earliest sort of Broadbent labels were these historic Madeiras, and then
So what I was very lucky working for the Symingtons, because the Symingtons are a big family that own a lot of port houses, and about a year into the job with them, they said to me, "Do you think you could sell Madeira?" And I knew the history of Madeira with America, so I said, "Absolutely." And so they bought a bunch of Madeira brands, and we basically relaunched Madeira in 1988. And prior to that, Madeira had not been sold in America much since Prohibition. It was the biggest selling wine in America until Prohibition. And very historic to the founding fathers. They all toasted the Constitution with it, toasted the Declaration of Independence with it, etc.
Yeah.
We could do a whole session
Yeah,
on
if you
Madeira.
look, I know if you look at the old documents, like on the the menu, it's Madeira.
Yeah, exactly.
Oftentimes, yeah.
It was massive. Then Prohibition sort of killed it off, and it really never recovered until we relaunched it in the States in 1989, 88. And I did a tasting at the Four Seasons Clift Hotel in San Francisco in 1989. And prior to that, I only knew of two restaurants which had Madeira. One was Massa's in San
Wow.
Francisco, which said you had a choice of Ikem or Madeira with the foie gras, and then Burns Steakhouse had it because he was buying it at auctions. But basically, it was non-existent. And a week after this tasting, where we had about 400 people come to it, Trevina and Napa Valley had 7 by the glass. Every restaurant in San Francisco had by the glass Madeiras, and it really took off very quickly. And now it's doing really well. And when I started my own company, when I left them, it was really to establish my own port and Madeira house. And so we do the Broadbent port, and that's the sort of label that you'll be looking at. And Madeiras, I sent my parents to the island because they're mad keen on Madeira, and they actually sent me notes on the Madeiras, but they found barrels. So the oldest Madeira we have is a 1933.
Wow.
Which is amazing. So they were able to find old barrels of Madeira, and so even though my company started in 1996, we actually have 1933 Madeira.
Wow, that's crazy. That's older than me.
Yeah, a lot. And my father's notes were predictable. My mother's notes on the wines were fantastic. One of them, she said, "This one's a deathbed razor." And I thought, "What do you mean a deathbed razor?" And she said, "Well, the acidity is so vibrant. If someone gave me this on my deathbed, I would just get up and be fine." And sadly, I didn't have the bottle of that wine to test the theory.
Yeah. It sounds like a really important bottle to have around now.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, so on the flip side, now the new Broadbent label, and it's not super new. I mean, the brand has been out there for a while.
Yeah.
And it's a top 100 last year from Wine Enthusiast. It's a Best Buy, but it's not a 1936. These are new, fresh, bright, young.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wine. So the other end of the spectrum, and it looks like they're not only in the bottle anymore.
Oh, you're talking about the Vinhou Verde.
I'm talking about all of those those wines I see around.
I don't have a bottle with me, but that's a label that everyone recognizes.
Don't try to drink your phone.
Yeah. So I pioneered port when I moved to America. I taught Americans how to drink port in about 1985. Built the port market for the US, then built Madeiras, and then when I started Broadbent Selections, we pioneered other regions like Lebanon and Portuguese table wines, and we were very early on in the game of New Zealand wines because prior to 1985 there were no New Zealand wineries, but so in 1996 we were very early in on the game of that, and we represent Argentine wines, Bodegas Vinhou, which was the very first Argentine wine shipped to America, and other wine regions, and a few traditional areas like Guntram was our first non-fortified wine producer who came to us with his German Rieslings. But Vinhou Verde is this category of wine which didn't have a very good reputation. And when I started importing Vinhou Verdes and we used our own brand, Broadbent, people thought I was nuts because until then, Vinhou Verde was sort of languishing on the bottom shelf of wine shops. It was sitting there for a long time. People weren't buying it, so it was going flat and stale and just not, Vinho Verde is supposed to be fresh and lively. And so I I always loved Vinho Verde when I drank it in Portugal. I thought it's fantastic wine, but it was not well appreciated here, and rightly so. And I figured the simple thing is just to put it in a refrigerated container, so when it arrives here, it's as fresh as it is in Portugal, and and it worked. And um, on top of that, my little niece painted this flower when she was four, Alice, and 4 years old, and it was a Christmas garden, and we put that on the label, um, and it really took off. So people bought it because of that really attractive uh, label, and then they bought it again because they liked the wine inside, because it really was beautiful and fresh, just like it is in Portugal. And so the category has now evolved, and it's one of the major categories of wine in the US. And then
So that your niece, is she apparently art runs in the family then? She's
I don't know.
fantastic.
She was four, and I'm not sure if she knew what she was painting. It looks like a flower. It might have been her idea of Santa Claus because of the Christmas card.
Yeah, no, it's so funny you say that. I actually have a painting of my from my daughter that I have framed because it's like the most magnificent clown. It has this hat with the thing and everything. She's like, "Wait, no, that's Sunflower Valley. It's supposed to be turned this way." Like, I see a clown. She
That's really
saw
cute. Yeah, that's
two
really cute.
mountains and sunflowers.
Well, unfortunately, my niece Alice is now 22 years old, and she's saying, "Hey, where's the?" Uh,
Now she's figuring it
I
out.
gave her mother a case of wine, and her mother drank it. So she got to give her another case, I guess.
Where are my royalties?
Yeah,
Uh, but I also think it's very interesting, the realization that Vino Verde is supposed to be fresh and to put it on a refrigerated container. I mean, we're not just talking about getting it over here and putting it in a cold box, which I think is probably also a great way to get it off the shelf and get people into people's hands. This is the entire journey,
yeah,
keeping it refrigerated and fresh
yeah,
and
yeah,
bright.
absolutely. And then we have a warehouse. The warehouse is nice and cool and everything. So it's really, and it's just a delicious drink. It's not a serious wine. It's just a fun drink. And when we launched the cans, I've been working on this project for 9 years to try and get cans. It's been a very long um, journey, which has been very frustrating because you can't, they don't do cans in Portugal. You had to find the can makers. You had to. Um, there's a lot that went into this, but we finally launched it, and the Vinho Verde region doesn't allow or didn't allow cans because cans didn't exist in Portugal, so never thought to include this as an accepted form of container. And so we beat about the bush on that, and eventually said, well, the brand is well enough known now that people will recognize it and buy it because they know it's the Broadbent Vinho Verde. But because we can't call it Vinho Verde, we just called it Spritzy White and Spritzy Rosé. Um, so, but ironically, literally a week after these cans landed in America, they changed the rules in Vinho Verde to allow Vinho Verde to be bottled in cans. And so we have this, we were wondering what to do about that because we now have this lovely wine called Spritzy Rosé and Spritzy White. Um, and we've decided that because the people who know the Vinho Verde will recognize this as Vinho Verde, but by keeping Spritzy White, we might actually attract drinkers who are not Vinho Verde drinkers who don't want Vinho Verde, and they might just buy this and discover it's delicious. And so we might have a new market for this, a new consumer group for this. Um, it is delicious and really interesting. As you know, I was in Boston last week, introducing these cans. The first time I was out in the market showing them to accounts and to retailers and restaurants, and everyone was buying them, even upscale places where I wouldn't have expected them. And the feedback that we got was really interesting because they said this is the ideal wine for a can, because most canned wines, you open it and it's just there's no visceral.
It's just flat. It's because
Yeah.
it's one. Yeah.
But I don't know if I can do this and have you hear it, but when you open this can, it's going to sound just like opening a can that you like. Hold on, let's see.
Ha.
And
And that's
it's got a little bit of spritz, which from the CO2 that Vinhou Verde has. And
right. So it's important. It's important to know, like Vinhou Verde has a natural spritz to it. So
it is delicious and fresh, so fresh. I was really impressed. The first time I tried one in the States, I was really worried, is it going to be as good as the bottles? And I was so pleasantly surprised by how delicious it is.
would you say, is there any difference between the can and the bottles as far as like the flavor or as far as like a mechanism?
No, there isn't. I mean, the production, it's the same wine. The only thing that you have to do when you're bottling it, obviously, because a bottle is a different size to a can, so you have to just adjust the amount of CO2 that's added to it at bottling. That's the only difference. So it is, and someone asked me the other day, you grew up drinking the finest wines in the world, the most expensive, the greatest, and your portfolio, you represent really fantastic wine producers who are top of their class and everything. Isn't it a bit unexpected to see you drinking from a can? Well, as much as I admire and love great fine wine, I also think it is just a drink. I've always been frustrated with people who make wine an exclusive thing, because wine is just a drink, and some are more expensive than others, but ultimately it's just a drink. And I think whatever it takes to get the wine, the grapes from the vineyard made into wine, whatever it takes to get the wine that's finished from the winery into your mouth is absolutely fine. I'm not against any form of container, as long as the container can maintain the quality. And certainly in the case of canned wines, it can. It can.
The can. Can.
Let's do the can.
Yeah, here we go. I think we have a new marketing. Yeah, I think we have your commercial. There you go. This is genius here.
Well, you're the great marketing person. Every time I talk to you, you have brilliant marketing ideas.
New plans. Well, it was. I have to get myself my hands on a couple of cans. They look amazing. I've always been a big fan of the Broadbent wines, and just their light, refreshing, and just super enjoyable line that you have, and it's great wine without being too complicated. Wine to enjoy, right? Just you don't. So I look forward to hopefully having a glass or a can or a bottle with you soon.
If you want to put this in a glass, you can. But obviously, the applications for this are any private club that doesn't allow glass containers by the swimming pool. This is perfect.
Yeah.
People who play golf can put it in their golf bags. By the tennis court, going to festivals, on boats, just keeping can everywhere. You can just drink these anywhere, and they're really easy.
And this is real authentic wine. I mean, this is not, it's this is, authentic Vinhou Verde. Is this, by the way, the first Vinhou Verde in a can imported in the United States?
We were the ones who had the idea, and
Mm-hmm.
and the problem is that the company who I partner with in Portugal, Sograt, they have their own brand of Vinho Verde, and I think one of the reasons that they made it was more difficult is because they wanted to develop their own and have theirs be the first to market. And so
Oh.
actually, about 3 years ago, I was in their office, having been working with them on cans for 6 years at that point, and them saying, no, it's not possible. I walked past an office in their building and said, what's that? Pointing at a can of their own Vinho Verde. And they said, well, yeah, we figured it out now and we can do yours next year, but we're going to launch ours this year. So they were the
Hmm.
they were the first to market, but they do acknowledge that it was my idea that they took,
Oh, good.
and which is fine. And they are really good partners. I'm happy that they can get to the market first. But I happen to think that ours is going to sell better than theirs, so I'm happy to give them a head start and let them
They
prove.
need it.
Yeah, and then they can't blame it on us being first to market. They'll just say,
That's right.
well, your branding is better.
That's right. Well, I look forward to having a glass with you. It was so wonderful having you on the show. And let's do this again.
Yeah, well, we should do a whole feature on Madeira because that's a
That's its
whole
own
story.
topic. I'd love to. We'll do a Madeira tasting through and through. It'll be
Brilliant.
fun.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.